This is The Inquiry. I'm Gregory Harms. Welcome to Flavor Country, or welcome back. Today I'd like to talk about innatism. One of the reasons I want to talk about innatism is students, when they're presented with this, receive it with a bit of incredulity. They're immediately suspicious. Not all the students, but many students I've had over the years, they seem resistant to the idea that human beings are born with, let's call it software for now, with stuff. We see it in the animal kingdom. We see it all over the animal kingdom. We see it in birds. Birds know how to make nests. No one taught the bird how to make a nest. It just knows how to make a nest. Spiders make webs. They're very intricate and very complex. And how'd they do that? They just do it. They're just born knowing how to do it. So if spiders and birds are born knowing stuff, it stands to reason that human beings with a far more complex brain architecture are also born knowing stuff. And it has a profound effect on how we experience the world. So we go back to Plato. We start with Plato, as we tend to do in philosophy. We start with Plato, and in one of his dialogues called the Phaedo, he says, "Then before we began to see or hear or otherwise perceive, that is, before we were born, we must have possessed knowledge of the equal itself." Now, what does that mean? That means that Plato is suggesting that we're born knowing, we have a familiarity with concepts, major concepts like equality. It's like you see two sticks on the ground, you see them as roughly equal in length. You see a rectangle, or you see a brick or in a wall, and you see a rectangle. Okay, so, or you can do math and stuff like that. So for Plato, or beauty, like I look at the sunset and I see a beautiful sunset or whatever. You did that even at a young age. And Plato is saying that we are born with these concepts. This is an innatist position. We are born with innate knowledge. Now, that's not to suggest that newborn babies are just, know what a rectangle is. You have to learn the word rectangle and so on and so forth. But you can see geometry in the world, right? You see geometry in the world. You see beauty in the world, and no one taught you how to see any of those things. No one sat you down, and your parents or your grandparents or whoever, and no one sat you down and told you or taught you that the flowers are beautiful or that the sunset's beautiful or whatever. It's just the way you look at the world. And that is innatism. This ability to see certain things in the world that maybe your dog or your cat don't see. Your dog or your cat quite likely don't see beauty in the world. They don't see geometry in the world. They don't do math. They don't have concepts because they don't have the brain architecture to allow them to do that. So we need to keep that in mind. And it's not just something, it's not something that was just written down in ancient Greece. This runs through the modern period and into René Descartes, another philosopher. He died in 1650. And he was definitely Team Plato. And he put forth he took an innatist position as well. And then this goes right into the 20th century. In this conversation, this issue is still with us, and we're still talking about it, and it's still a topic that is written about and discussed and at times debated, though I don't know how much room there is to debate. So I'd like to, in this episode, talk a little bit about the different aspects of innatism. That is, what are human beings born with? And what does this say about what we are as organisms, as a species, as Homo sapiens? So I guess we'll start with language. Language, the field of linguistics was revolutionized in the 1950s by one Noam Chomsky, who's still alive, though I think he's not doing very well because I think he's just suffered a stroke. And yeah, I don't think Chomsky's in very good shape right now, sadly. But at the ripe old age of 96. He revolutionized linguistics, and he came up with an approach to linguistics that not only revolutionized that field, but revolutionized the humanities. He changed the humanities. He crushed B.F. Skinner and the behaviorist school of thought in psychology. He crushed B.F. Skinner like an insect, and the humanities have never been the same since. Because Chomsky went back to Plato and Descartes, and he determined or concluded rather that language is handled by what we might call a cognitive module. So it's something in your brain. No one taught you, and this sounds weird, but no one taught you your first language. So if say your first language is English, no one taught you that. No, the grammar, and when I say grammar, I don't mean the stuff you learn in junior high. I mean, or the stuff you learn in grade school or whatever. I guess it's a part of grade school. I'm not talking about that kind of grammar. That's more tantamount to etiquette. You know, you don't split infinitives. I don't think they even learn that anymore, because I've asked my students and they don't even know what an infinitive is, much alone how to split one or whatever. Or, you know, like nouns and adjectives or subordinate clauses or something like this. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sort of the deep structure of language. And that's something that your brain handles. That's something that you're born with. That's something that, I mean, yes, infants don't just, you know, show up speaking French or Russian or Arabic or something. They have to learn the lexicon. So you have to learn that a table is, in English, a table is called a table. You have to learn that word. But that's the vocabulary. That's not the grammar. So Chomsky mentions some interesting things about children, and one is that he asked the question, how is it that very young children produce new sentences they've never heard before according to rules they don't know exist? So if you've ever been around a 3-year-old, you know they don't shut up. They just talk non-stop from the minute they get out of bed to the minute they go back to bed, and then good luck keeping them there. There doesn't even have to be anybody there. They can just sit in the corner with a pile of toys and they'll just talk blah, 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 just nonstop. Well, they're producing new sentences. It's not mimicry. People oftentimes assume that language is mimicry. You learn, you know, say English or French or whatever from your parents, by being around your parents and by being around your grandparents, and you just pick up the language. But that's not how it works, Chomsky concludes. The very young child is producing new sentences that he or she has never heard before, according to rules that are totally, you know, the child's totally oblivious to these rules, like, you know, the rules of grammar that you learned in school. He also points out that take 2 children. One has a very high IQ, and the other child has a cognitive deficiency, quite severe, you know, something like Down syndrome, where the IQ is quite low. So you got 2 children with pretty dramatic differences in their computational ability. Those 2 children learn their first language at the same time, at the same speed, and you can barely tell them apart. Now, the kid with the higher IQ will go on to like develop a large vocabulary and so on and so forth. But the initial moment of language acquisition is identical in both children, despite the despite the discrepancy between the two children's intelligence, their IQ, you know. So that's something to consider. There's a third thing that Chomsky presents us with a grammatical problem, and we'll use the sample sentence, "The man who is tall is happy." Now, it's an absurd sentence, but that doesn't matter. It could be anything. It could be the baker who is tired is grumpy or something. It doesn't matter. As long as there's multiple verbs, you know, there's multiple verbs is in the sentence, then we can do this. We can conduct this experiment. So the man who is tall is happy. Okay, that's our sentence. Now, children will, when asked to turn the sentence into a question by moving one word, we'll move the second is. We'll move the second is and come up with, is the man who is tall happy? They won't move the first is. They won't scan, but that's interesting because they won't scan the sentence as a linear entity. They approach the sentence structurally, and nobody taught them that. They approach the sentence structurally, not as a linear entity, because if you move the first is, you get a nonsense sentence. You get, is the man who tall is happy? Well, it's a nonsense sentence. It's gibberish. And children don't make that mistake. Speaking of mistakes, children, you know, it's sort of, you know, assume that children make a lot of grammatical mistakes. They don't. They make very few grammatical mistakes. I was many years ago, I was trying to get two, I don't remember how old they were, 6 or 5 or whatever, how they were pretty young. I was trying to get 2 kids to eat their lunch, a boy and a girl, trying to get them to eat their lunch, which, you know, was like close to impossible. So I tried to use logic, and I'm like, well, if you guys finish your lunch, you can go outside and play, you know, but that didn't seem to matter. They just kept on, you know, horsing around. So I turned it into a contest. I said, all right, the person who finishes their lunch first gets, I don't remember, twice the dessert or something like this. Okay, then it was on. Then they started gobbling up all, you know, their carrot sticks and their PB&J or whatever. Okay, so the girl won. And she turned to the boy and said, "Ha! I winned you." And I thought, that's interesting. What'd she do? She applied the rule. You have to learn about irregular verbs, like win, won, swim, swam, run, ran. You have to learn that in school. You have to learn irregular verbs. But she applied the rule and made a very sophisticated mistake. She also used it as a transitive verb, but we'll cut the kid some slack. The point is that she applied the rule and didn't really make much of a... But if you listen to children speak, they don't make many grammatical mistakes. They'll mispronounce words occasionally, like Paschetti and stuff like that. But grammatically, they have a pretty tight grip on the basic grammar of the language. And then when they go to school, they sort of, you know, they learn etiquette. They learn, you know, you don't end the sentence with the preposition or something like this. So they make very few mistakes, children. They make very few mistakes, and more to the point, they learned that grammar that they're using. It kind of grew, and they didn't really learn it. It kind of grew in their head. There's a department in your brain which is similar to an organ, or tantamount to an organ, and the brain handles that work. It's designed. You're designed to think grammatically. You've done it since you were a child. When I discuss this with students, I asked the class. These are university students. I asked the class, raise your hand if you can explain to me right now what a subordinate clause is. Okay, no hands go up. Okay. Okay. So all right. So nobody in here knows what a subordinate clause is. I said that's interesting because you're hearing them in my sentences as I speak. You're sometimes bracketing them, sometimes putting them aside, sometimes you're homing in on the overarching structure of the sentence, and you're paying less attention to the subordinate clauses, and you're doing that right now, and you're not even paying attention. I mean, you're not even trying. You're just sitting there wondering when 315 is going to roll around so you can get out of here because you're tired of listening to Harms and his BS. So you're not even trying. And furthermore, you don't even know what the hell a subordinate clause is. But your brain does. Your brain knows what that is. Your brain knows what a subordinate clause is. You don't. And you're doing it right now, and nobody taught you how to do that. Your parents didn't sit you down and explain to you how to pay less attention to subordinate clauses, and pay more attention to the overarching meaning of a sentence. No one taught you that. That's just part of how your brain's put together. Pre-wired is the term that gets used. Not hardwired, pre-wired. You have to learn, like I said, you need exposure to the language to learn the words, and you got to learn French, or you're going to learn Russian, or you're going to learn Greek, or whatever. But the grammar, the deep structure of the language, that's in your brain. Just like spiders and birds. It's just there. They know how to make nests and spin webs. And you know how to hear meaning when someone's making noise with their mouth, like I'm doing right now. You hear meaning. That's a pretty marvelous ability that human beings have. And we're the only animals that we know of that are able to do that. Chimpanzee can't do that. Giraffe can't do that. Leopard can't do that. You can do that. Chances are, it was kind of a funny comment I read in a book about primatology and about apes. So I read a lot about primatology, and the primatologist said in the book that the reason gorillas don't talk might be because they don't have anything to say. And I thought about that. I'm like, that really, it was a funny thing to say, but I started thinking about that. And I'm like, let's say giraffes could talk. What would they say if giraffes could talk? They probably wouldn't say much. Would they talk about, take a simple declarative sentence. Take a simple declarative sentence. Say, I want to go to the store tomorrow. Okay. I want to go to the store tomorrow. Okay, that's fine. So, would a giraffe say that? Well, it's that sentence is start to finish full of concepts that the giraffe doesn't have. Because giraffes don't think in concepts. So, probably wouldn't say that. Not that a giraffe would go to the store, but giraffe wouldn't talk like that. Probably just, tired, hungry, whatever, if the giraffe would even say that, they wouldn't have much to say. And as another primatologist pointed out in a book I was reading, no chimpanzee on record has talked about what he's going to do tomorrow. Okay, you can do that. You think in terms of, those concepts, and you're able to articulate what you're going to do tomorrow, or what you want to do tomorrow, or something like this. So that's all part of this innatist approach to looking at human knowledge, I guess you might say. The big fancy word is epistemology. It's a philosophy of knowledge. That's an epistemological consideration. So language, we could put language on the list as innate abilities. Okay, I would also add morality. Morality is part of your genetic endowment. Now, for this, we go back to David Hume and others, but David Hume kind of, really put the cherry on the sundae, and Adam Smith put an even bigger cherry on the sundae. And to quote David Hume, morality is more properly felt than judged of. Right? Morality is more properly felt than judged of. So what David Hume was saying, and Adam Smith and a number of others at that time and during the Enlightenment, is that your sense of right and wrong are native. It's more neck down than neck up, to use that metaphor. It's more neck down than neck up. It's something you feel. Your fundamental sense of right and wrong is part of your genetic endowment, and therefore it's a native structure, and it's a native ability, and we could put that in the innatist under the innatist umbrella. That's not to suggest that David Hume and Plato were on the same page, because David Hume is very critical of Plato, so he wouldn't say that he agrees with Plato. But if we look at this particular aspect of Hume's thought, it fits pretty comfortably, I would argue, with what Plato is saying, that these moral judgments are biological in nature, and that's how we experience the world. Unless you're a sociopath or psychopath or something, you feel, if you see something immoral, like something that's way over the top, you feel it. It's a feeling, and then there are lesser considerations in the area of morality, like stuff you had to learn, like you have to learn to hold the door open for people, or you had to learn to not cut in line, or you had to learn to not belch at the table or something. It's more like manners and etiquette. Again, etiquette. That stuff you had to learn. That's cultural. The cultural bits you had to learn, because culture is. We'll talk about this in a subsequent or future episode. Culture is human beings imitating other human beings, and you had to learn that kind of stuff. Like holding the door open and not cutting in line and stuff. But the basic sense of right and wrong that you have, that you experience in the world as you go through the world, is biological in nature, and therefore it's innate. It's part of the structure. It's part of how you look at the world, in the same way that you look at the sunset and you see, you see beauty. Look at the flowers, you look at a person, you're like, that's a beautiful person, that's a beautiful sunset, it's a beautiful those are beautiful flowers. No one taught you that, and no one taught you to see right and wrong in the world. You just do. Young children understand right and wrong. There's very fascinating work being done at Yale, the Infant Cognition Center. It's called the Baby Lab, and Paul Bloom and his wife, Catherine Wynn, or is it Catherine? Oh dear, Catherine Wynn. They test infants and toddlers, and they show them they give them puppet shows, and they do what are called looking tests, and they will have like two stuffed bears or whatever, and one is behaving badly and one's behaving well and being helpful. And then they look at the baby, and the baby will stare at the data on this are pretty solid. The baby will stare at the bear that was helpful and doesn't want anything to do with the bear that was acting badly and by being rude and not being helpful or being harmful. So kids understand that at a very young age. I mean, these kids are, handful of months old, and then they test older children as well, and toddlers and so on and so forth. But the results are the data they're getting at Yale are solid. You can read Paul Bloom's book, Just Babies, which is a fantastic read, and he talks about the research that they're doing. Yeah, it's really worthwhile. But that's, and if you put children on a playground, they will invariably start playing a game, right? They'll start playing a game, and it doesn't even, if they don't, they'll just make one up if they have to. They don't care, and that's probably innate as well. The kids play games. Kids will just, will make up a game or play a game that, whatever on the jungle gym that is competitive, and there's a set of rules, and it's a fairly sophisticated way of children interacting with one another. And if one kid breaks the rules, oh boy, it's on. They get mad. They read that kid the riot act, and you cheated, and oh boy. Did anyone teach them that? No. They just know it. They just know you're not supposed to cheat at the game, So morality is also sort of wired into us like language. Same thing. And then I would move on to, I won't spend a lot of time on this because we'll do a future episode on religion, but the historian and scholar a scholar of religion, a historian of religion, Karen Armstrong, she says that Homo sapiens could easily be labeled as Homo religiosus, which sounds like a Harry Potter spell, come to think of it. But we tend toward the spiritual. If we look at early human history, humans have been doing religion for hundreds, thousands of years in one form, and not codified, organized, scriptural religion like what you would call religion. We weren't doing that 200,000 years ago. But you can see the building blocks of human spirituality on display in early human groups, and then later, much later, like the oldest are about 3,000 years old. Then you get religion, like what you would call religion, like codified, organized, scriptural religion. But even if you went back to Plato, even if you went back to ancient Greece, like if you got on a time machine and went back to ancient Greece and you started talking about, they didn't even have a word for it. They didn't even have a word for it. So it's a new thing, religion. But you can see that humans seem to drift toward spirituality rather naturally. I don't know what that spells for the future of religion necessarily, but humans seem to do some kind of spirituality innately on their own. And even if religion sort of runs its course and sort of people, human beings lose interest, I think it'll be replaced with something. They have to do some kind of spirituality. They seem to have to do that in some capacity. I don't know what the future holds though, but my crystal ball works about as well as anybody else's. And then I would also add under this list, add to the list the issue of personality. 'Cause you've got personality. Walk with personality. So you have a certain personality, your parents probably, or whoever raised you, probably didn't have much to do with it. How you turned out, quote unquote, we talk about that. Kids turn out. Your parents probably didn't have much influence on who you became anyway. They could do the opposite. You can destroy a child. You can abuse the child and turn the child into a psychopath. You can do serious damage, no doubt about that. But, but raising your kids and doing your best and so on and so forth, I don't, it's pretty limited. And the person who's done like the path cutting work on this is Judith Rich Harris in her book The Nurture Assumption, where she talks about in detail. She's done some pretty impressive research. She talks about how parents don't really have much of an impact on their children at all. Like, we assume that maybe culturally we assume that your parents kind of programmed you to be a certain way, but that ends up not being the case, really. I was talking about this very issue with a friend of mine. Let's call him Scott. And I had a feeling Scott was not going to take this well. Scott's got 2 sons. They're in college. And I had a feeling Scott wasn't going to take this very well. But he said, I'm relieved. He's like, is this solid research? Are we on solid ground here? I'm like, yeah, this is pretty solid. He's like, I'm quite relieved to hear this. And I was like, wait, what? He's like, I'm relieved to hear this. I'm like, why are you relieved to hear this? And he said, because now I know that I didn't screw my sons up. Now I know both his sons. I've known both his sons since they were born. And they are just a pleasure to be around. They're both well-balanced, pleasant human beings. And, they got interests and, they're a lot of fun to be around. And Scott did well by his sons. So his worry was to me a little strange. But I understand, a good parent is always worried about, am I doing the right thing? Am I raising my kids right? Am I making mistakes and so on? So he was relieved. And I was really bewildered by his relief. And he's like, so you're saying, no, these 2 sons are very different. They get very different personalities. I won't go into the details, but they're 2 very different creatures. And with, talents and abilities and, so on and so forth, inclinations. And he's like, so you're saying if my sons grew up in Russia in a different household under different parents, they'd kind of be the same as they are today? And I said, yes. Minus cultural differences. Obviously, if the boys grew up in Russia in a different household under different parents, there definitely be differences. But the core, the fundamental, the core of their personalities would be the same. I think they'd be the same. I think you'd see the personalities of the 2 boys. I think they'd be very, very similar to what they are now. And he was just sort of delighted at hearing that news, which I guess gave me a sense of relief, because I thought he was going to not take that well, but he took it really well. Read Judith Rich Harris's book, The Nurture Assumption. It's a field-changing text, and the praises of it have been sung quite loudly by Steven Pinker at Harvard, who's one of the world's renowned psychologists at the moment. And Steven Pinker has said that this book will change the field, and I suspect it already has. So check that out. All of this got me thinking about nurses. I spent 2 months last year in the hospital. Well, in a hospital and a rehab physical therapy clinic, one of the premier ones in the United States. There's a physical therapy clinic, rehab clinic in Chicago called Shirley Ryan, and it's one of the premier facilities in the world, or in the country. I spent a lot of time there too. I was there for probably over a month, probably about a month. I don't know. I can't remember. Weeks anyway. In 2 trips. I went to Shirley Ryan twice last year, and surgery twice. Yeah, so I mean, to cut the story short, I spent a lot of time in the presence of nurses and PCTs and physical therapists and occupational therapists. And I met many. I don't know how many, but quite a few. And that's how I kind of spent 2 months of my life. Probably, maybe more than 2 months. Maybe I'm cutting that short. Maybe over 2 months. And I started thinking about nurses, because most of the nurses and the PCTs and the therapists and so on, most of them are really good. Most of them are superb, but some of them, every once in a while, you really get a dud. And I started to think about that. I'm like, why? Why would that be? Why are some nurses so good and some are just terrible? And I started to think about it, and I started to think about all these things we've been talking about, Plato and Descartes and the Innatism and the whole bit. And I started thinking, I'm like, it's in the nurse, it's in the person. Good nurses are born. They all went to the same school. I mean, they all went to the same programs. They all studied the same stuff. They all took the same test to become a nurse. They all, got certified. I don't know what test they take, but I mean, it's, kind of board certification or something to become a nurse. They all took the same test. They all did the same stuff. They all have pretty much, basically, the same expertise. So why are some good and some bad? Because the ones who are bad, I would argue, are in the wrong job. They're not bad people. That's just the wrong job. Because a good nurse is intuitive. A good nurse knows what you need before you do. A good nurse is attentive to your needs and, oh, your head looks crooked. Let me adjust your pillow. And just like even the small details and stuff, the stuff that you don't learn in school. I think the nursing programs, they do have a sort of a, how to accommodate your patient and so on and so forth. But you can't teach that. You can't teach a nursing student to be intuitive. It doesn't work like that. And I was talking about this with some students recently, and a gal who's a nursing student, she was really worried about this information. Like she was like, oh my God. I'm like, what's the matter? Why you seem like you're freaking out? She's like, I'm really worried, like I'm going to be a bad nurse. Because if you're right, then maybe I'm in the wrong job. Maybe I wasn't born to do this. I'm like, you're going to be a superb nurse. And she just looks at me. I'm like, you're going to be a superb nurse. I can already tell. I can tell by your personality. She's been in my class since January. So I said, you're going to be a good nurse. I mean, I know it because I know your personality. And she pays close attention to me. I mean, me and my stupid, if I gotta, transfer back to the wheelchair and wheel off to the restroom or something, and she's like, "Are you okay? Should you go in there by yourself?" She's very dialed in. She's very intuitive. She's concerned. She's sympathetic, and that is a good nurse. A good nurse is dialed in and sympathetic and intuitive. And that's her. Yes, Rayanne, I'm talking about you. Yeah, that's how that works. It's like going to you can go to art school. You're gonna become an artist. You can go to art school and take classes and learn techniques and learn this medium and learn that medium, and you could do that from now till whenever. To the end of your life, you could become a very knowledgeable artist. craftsperson. You could learn how to paint, you could learn how to sculpt, you could learn this material and that material and this technique and that technique. You could learn all that stuff. And anybody could learn all that stuff. Anybody. But is art school going to make you a great artist? No. No. You can't teach that. The great artist is just born. The great artist is in you. And Plato made this point, to bring Plato up again. Plato said that artists have an innate ability to do what they do. And it's just, it's just in them. It's not anything they learned. I've been to art school, so I know for a fact that they don't teach talent. Anybody could learn how to play guitar and dance. Well, unless you're in a wheelchair, and sing, and you take voice lessons, and you could learn how to use the recording studio and learn how to navigate all that technology and so on and so forth. And you could do all that stuff. You could learn all that stuff, and you could learn multiple instruments. Are you going to be like Prince? Probably not. What made him unique? Him. He had this preternatural ability to do all those things really well. I don't think there's been a more talented person ever to pick up a guitar and stand behind a microphone. I remember John Lennon probably wrote better songs, and you could find different artists who burn a little hotter in the various departments. But when it comes to total package, that's it. That is as talented, I think, as a human being could be when it comes to being an entertainer and being a musician and being on stage with a guitar. That's it. That's the tippy top. That's as good as you can be. And that's him. That's not to say that he didn't work hard. It's not to say that he didn't, spend a lot of time learning all those instruments and learning how to use the recording studio and all that stuff. He probably put in a lot of hours, but he was a genius. And you can't teach that. You can't teach genius. You're just born with it. You're born with it. It's like Bobby Fischer playing chess. I play chess, but I suck at chess. And I could get better at chess. I could, study the game. I could play every day. I could immerse myself in chess. But where I'm going to peak, the best I'm ever going to be is mediocre. Maybe not even that good. Bobby Fischer was a feverish student of the game. The guy didn't have an off switch. He played constantly. And he studied the game constantly. But he was a genius. And he played that game. He played chess at a level that I couldn't even understand. I don't even know what he's doing. When he's playing Boris Spassky and stuff. Chess, masters were watching those matches between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, and they're like, well, I don't even know what he's doing. These are chess masters. These are the best players in the world. And they're like, I don't know, what's he doing? He's redefining the game is what he's doing. He's redefining chess. Well, good luck finding that in a book. Good luck, because you won't. You won't find that. And you won't find how to be a better nurse in a nursing program. You're just born to be a good nurse. So that's a quick rundown of innatism, what we might call nativism, and discussing a little bit about what we as human beings have when we show up. That's not to say that we're sort of finished products as babies, as infants, but the brain is pre-wired, if that's a term, to accomplish these things in a way that a chimpanzee cannot. We have, language and morality, and throw religion in there, and the personality, and so on and so forth, and talent and genius and whatever else. That's all baked into the cake, as it were. So yeah, that's a little bit about innatism. What's next? Oh, relativism. Oh, relativism. That's going to be a good one. That's going to be a good episode. That'll be episode 5. Can you believe that? Episode 5 already. On the Inquiry.